None of us are perfect. And also I have done things where I, in hindsight would think, could have done this differently. The key is you need self-reflection. You need to understand what you're doing. So what you got to do is make sure there's always people around you as a leader that have the ability to say no to you, and that these are people that you're listening to.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley, in partnership with Leumi Tech, sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Synergy Global, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, Birthright Excel, Serona Partners, and in media partnership with C-Tech. Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders, and this episode is all about soul. Meet Ralf Specht, CEO of Spark44. Ralf is a visionary business leader and creator of the Soul System, a framework that aligns value-creating employee action with broader corporate strategy through shared understanding and shared purpose. As a founding partner of Spark44, he was the architect of an innovative industry-first joint venture with Jaguar Land Rover, which grew under his leadership as CEO to a global revenue of more than $100 million and 1,200 employees. Previously, he consulted with global brands for 22 years with McCann Erickson. During his 25 years in executive roles, one key question kept him awake at night. How do we build and sustain a human-centric performance culture? His driving vision is to make soulless companies a thing of the past. Ralf Specht, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Thank you very, very much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great, Matthias. Great to be on the show.
Thank you very much for joining me. Let's talk about, companies, building great companies, companies with purpose, and a KPI that you've developed and that you've been thinking about that looks to be a much more important KPI than that the Nasdaq set out and the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones, the Soul Index and the Soul Framework, as you call it. So, Ralf, thank you very much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Tell me a little bit about yourself before we dive into the Soul Framework and the importance of soul within companies. Who are you, Ralf, in this whole trajectory of company building and executive within companies?
So, the last thing I did in terms of my corporate world life has been being a co-founder of a startup back in 2011. And I left the company that we built in 2019. At that time, I was the CEO of the company. The company was called Spark44. It's been a joint venture with Jaguar Land Rover, an industry-first global marketing joint venture. And prior to that, I've been working with McCann Erickson in the advertising and marketing space for over 22 years. So you could say a global business leader in the marketing space is kind of what I've been doing. And as I stepped down from my post at Spark44, I received numerous messages from colleagues from all over the world, because we had like 1,200 people and 19 offices across the world. And those messages went far beyond to what you would expect a normal, if there's ever going to be a normal farewell message that you receive from employees. And what was so different was that all of these messages honed in on the culture that we had built. And so as I was contemplating about all these messages on my iPhone, I was like, okay, I could do two things, right? Leave it on my iPhone and look at them every now and again when I'm getting sentimental about it, or actually take the lessons learned from those executive years that led to people writing me these messages and create something that helps leaders to build a corporate culture that actually is true to the business and really successful for them.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you, even before we get to that, I mean, obviously it's beautiful that people enjoy the workplace and they feel fulfilled and with a purpose and involved. But why is it important from a business perspective? What validation do we have that this thing we call company culture, soul, purposefulness, why is it even that big a deal in our world?
It's a huge deal. And I think people are on a journey to realize that it is bigger than they thought. There's a wonderful study from a company called OC Tanner in the US, and they issue a global culture report once a year. And what I call a business with soul or a company with soul is what they call a thriving culture. And when they analyzed thriving cultures, they had some remarkable results. And those results are stunning, actually. So not only are employees or are companies that have a thriving culture 13 times more likely to have highly engaged employees, or they have an 8 times higher incidence of great work, or they have a double likelihood to have increased revenues. They also have create a situation, an environment, actually, where employees are 3 times less in danger of burnout situations, and the companies are 3 times less likely to face layoffs. So, double revenue, 3 times less likely layoffs, happier employees, less burnout situations. What else do you want?
What else do you want? Now, and tell me a little bit about this Soul Index Global Top 20. What is this, and how does it fare with the other similar indexes, whether it's the Nasdaq, Dow Jones, etc.?
So, when I finished writing the book Building Corporate Soul, obviously what you do when writing a book is you study lots of research and surveys, and you dive into it, lots of interviews. And as I was finishing it and had embraced all these studies, I thought, actually, there's something interesting here, because it seemed to me that companies that score high on employee engagement scores, for instance, or employee satisfaction scores, actually have a better business, similar to what the OC Tanner research suggests. So what I did was basically take a number of studies that focus on employee engagement, employee satisfaction, and CEO approval from employees, plus some business success studies, best global brands from Interbrand, for instance, and created a new ranking. And that ranking is what I call the Soul Index. And as I was finishing the work and had the top 20 companies on my Excel sheet, I handed that over to some financial analysts, and they looked at that, and they came back with something that wowed me big time. So from 2016 to 2020, that index delivered 199% return. Nasdaq did 180, and I think Dow Jones was 75, and S&P 500 83. So if you really dive into the data, what you see is companies that put an emphasis on workplace culture are better off in business and are enjoying much greater performance.
Mm-hmm. And obviously in the second we'll get into ways to measure that and ways to understand this. But was it you're hearing these messages, you're receiving them after leaving the corporate world. Is this something company building, the culture, the soul of a company? Is this something that you took with you throughout your career? Or is this something that sort of naturally happened due to your leadership style that then gave you an aha moment when you left?
When I started in the corporate world, I started back in, I think it was 1984, so quite a while ago, right? And I started with a German publishing company, Bertelsmann, which was the largest publishing house across the world at that time. And their founder had set up what he called a constitution for the company, which basically similar like the constitution for a state, putting up all the values and the behaviors that he wanted to see in the company. That was the first time I got in touch with corporate culture in reality. And I was a young man at the time, and I read it, and I witnessed how it was taken into action inside the company with the various colleagues and departments that I had. as I moved on and moved to McCann Erickson, obviously you cannot not experience a corporate culture, right? Every company has its culture, but only few
Right.
have got their soul. And leadership plays a vital part in setting the North Star, and making sure the behaviors that work with the intended culture are supported or not. And I've seen both. So, and as we found in Spark44, the five of us, and I remember still to that day, we were 5 founders, and we were sitting in London in an office of a befriended agency and thinking about how do we build the thing now? Well, how do we design the organization? How do we make sure that the culture can emerge that we can be proud of? And the way we did it was we looked at what we did not like, what we had not had seen before, and all of us were in our mid-40s, early 50s, so we had already seen a lot. And putting all of that on a flip chart, organizing it by a few principles, and then defining and designing the organization as we wanted it to be was the major step to get there. So you can say it's always been a part of my life, but it's a rare opportunity that you can design an organization from scratch, right? Usually you get somewhere and there's something already there, and you got to work with that. I mean, one of the greatest examples of a company culture turnaround is Microsoft with what Nadella did and how he focused on culture back in the day, I think 2014. And the LinkedIn integration is a great example of that. And now we're going to see how that pans out with the Activision integration, which is probably going to be something to watch closely, as you couldn't have a larger clash of cultures than these two.
Incredible. So Ralf, tell me a little bit about building corporate soul. Fast forward to today, you've authored this book, and now you've spent a lot of meaningful time thinking critically about, not just what you did at Spark44, which sounded like a great success, especially with the biggest validation of the messages you received when leaving, but now thinking more generally about what can companies do to have better clarity on their soul, empower their employees, and hopefully make it to your Soul Index Global Top 20. First of all, what does it mean to have good soul within a company? What did you learn? How do you distill that into some parameters that you can measure?
So I created this framework, which I call the soul system. And when you look at that, it's got 3 layers, 3 levels, if you like. At the center is purpose. The next level is strategic context, and the third level is what you experience in the workplace. And in my words, this sounds like it starts with a shared purpose, that you need the shared understanding, that you need the shared behaviors. So the word shared happens every time I talk about this. And shared is really critical, because you can have the greatest ideas on earth if you cannot find a way to share them in an appropriate and meaningful way with anybody, any stakeholder that you got, you're not going to get anywhere. So on purpose, and we've had a purpose discussion for the last 10 years, and everybody now knows that you need purpose. And so that's not the question. The question is what do you do with it? And what I'm saying is, number one, you got to make sure that your purpose is shared by your executive team and shared with all stakeholders. If you don't have that, it's a useless exercise. Then you get to the shared understanding, and that means we need to talk about vision, we need to talk about mission, and we need to talk about values, and we need to talk about spirit. Spirit is something that's often forgotten. And spirit to me is the intended corporate culture. If the management team sits together and says, okay, this is kind of, we're clear on purpose, we're clear on our vision, on our mission, on our values, what spirit do we want this place to have? How do we want it to feel like? And once you've got all of that, you get to the third level, which are the shared behaviors. And they basically look at everything that is happening inside a company. How do you hire people? How do you promote people? Even how do you fire people? How do you find partners, partner companies to work with? How do you deal with customers? All elements of the ecosystem that make the corporate culture tangible And to me, if these three levels, the shared purpose, the shared understanding, and the shared behaviors are in sync, if there is an integrity between those three, companies have a great opportunity to build corporate soul. As I said, every company has got its culture, only few got corporate soul.
Does this necessarily mean that everybody has to be in agreement on the shared purpose and the shared activities? And does there need to be an agreement on the type of behavior that we need to have in the company and the type of work that we ought to be doing to solve whatever we're aiming to solve?
Absolutely. I think the alignment at the leadership level is absolutely critical. If that doesn't exist, you're not going to get anywhere. But there's been another discussion over the past few years about individual purpose. And that's kind of what's your purpose and what's my purpose and what's everybody else's purpose. And that's a fine discussion. There's nothing wrong with that discussion. But I ask everybody to pay a bit of attention, because the corporate purpose and the individual purpose of individual people within the workforce are not necessarily the same. Every now and then you find situations where they overlap and where they're synonymous, more or less, but that is a rare exception. And I don't think that is required. But what is required is that the leadership team is clear about its purpose, that the extended leadership teams are clear about their purpose and the purpose of the company, and that they talk and communicate well with their workforce and all other stakeholders, that everybody understands what the firm is about, where it wants to go and how it wants to do it. And in terms of the behaviors, what really helps is if you kind of code certain experiences so that people always understand this is happening because we got this or that or the other, and things happen in a way that people can connect them with the purpose and the vision and the mission.
So before we understand, what actions we need to take right now, we need to understand what's the current status of our company, right? And if I'm sitting here and I have a company and I'm trying to distill and to understand where am I at, where do I need to be putting my time and effort, are there tangible ways for me to understand that, sort of to give myself a score on the soul of my business or the soul of my company?
Well, first of all, I've had a number of conversations with leaders who came to me and said, well, our company is great. We got great corporate culture. I think we got corporate soul. And my response to them has always been, great, congratulations. It's great to hear that you're caring about it. The only thing where I would be a little bit careful is I'm always contemplating whether it's the leader who can talk about to us whether the company has got soul or not. To me, it's the employees who can tell you whether the place has got soul. And you can see it. There are the likes of Glassdoor, where people just post their views. And a lot of people have said to me, yeah, but that's usually biased. And I say, yeah, it is biased. There's nothing wrong with the bias there, but the bias is true for every company. So between companies, you can compare it, and so you can see, for instance, if you compare Adobe and which is a company that is not so much in the spotlight all the time, with Apple, that was in the spotlight every second day, and you look at the Glassdoor scores, or comparably, you've got the various KPIs about how the companies are doing, quality of engagement and satisfaction, and it's even split down into lots of areas like how they're doing on diversity and so on and so forth. And you can see the differences, and then you're not surprised that Adobe is the number one company in the Soul Index.
Right. That makes sense. Now, Ralf, take me back through, if you're thinking back to the research you've done and the different understandings that you've gained, what is something non-trivial that you've learned about soul and about company building that, when you left Spark44, maybe you knew, maybe you didn't, but it's non-trivial for entrepreneurs around the world. What did you learn through this research?
I think most leaders intrinsically want to create good companies. I haven't really come across anyone who didn't want that in the first place. But every now and then, leaders get off track, and it's easy to get off track, to lose the straight line here, and it's easy because there are so many pressures, there's so many constraints, and there are so many things that are happening along the way that every now and then people say, well, I got to focus on corporate culture next time, but right now we got to hit that deadline, or we got to make that milestone, or whatever it is. What they do not understand or do not realize at that moment is they might be treating a short-term something for a long-term loss. And I mean, there's hardly anybody that's perfect, right? None of us are perfect. And also I have done things where in hindsight would think, could have done this differently. The key is you need self-reflection. You need to understand what you're doing. So what you got to do is make sure there's always people around you as a leader that have the ability to say no to you, and that these are people that you're listening to. You need to create a sense of like internal ambassadors that are not part of the leadership team. So basically the next generation of leaders who ideally become the ambassadors for your shared purpose, and make sure that every now and then you're reminded of where you're going. And then you better every now and then look at the O.C. Tanner piece and look at 13 times more engagement and double revenues, and you should think, okay, so what can I do to make that happen? And communication is a key element of it.
Ralf, thank you very, very much for joining me and for sharing your journey and your insights and your understanding with me. Definitely things I'm going to be taking with me for the long run as I build my own companies and I think through the type of leader that I want to be and the type of company that I want to build. Very optimistic note on your deep understanding that at the end, entrepreneurs want to build great companies, but we're human and we need the skills to do that, and we need to understand that the way we perceive something is not necessarily the way that the rest of the organization perceives it. So knowing how to ask the right questions and then being honest in answering them and action-oriented when thinking through them, that leaves me with a lot of inspiration. So thank you very much, Ralf, and stay safe and stay healthy.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.